summary of Negotiate This by Caring, But Not That Much by Herb Cohen. The game of life. While negotiating is serious, it also involves a certain amount of game playing. Use psychology. Always convey the attitude that you have options to show those you are negotiating with that you can walk away. Maintain your emotional distance and observe relationships and patterns as though you were an outsider. Never become involved in personal vendettas. If you're not wholly invested in a single outcome, you'll be more flexible. In bargaining, you always have options. Keep as many choices open as possible. Remain detached, so you'll be able to anticipate events before they happen. If you see an argument coming, you'll be able to step aside and let it pass, preventing a full-blown dispute. You'll be able to solve problems before they become crises. Experience helps. Seasoned negotiators begin to recognize patterns of events, behavior, and compromises. The entertainer Jackie Gleason was a good example of someone who cared, but not that much. When the popularity of Gleason's variety show was at its peak, he was negotiating a new contract with CBS. Knowing his value, he asked for the then astronomical salary of $11 million per year. However, in the middle of negotiations with the CBS chief executive, William Paley, who desperately wanted to sign Gleason again, the hungover Gleason fell asleep. Realizing that although he wanted the show, Gleason hadn't wanted it so much that he would stay sober the night before, and that he might even walk away from it, Paley agreed to the $11 million. From no to yes. The goal of negotiating is to persuade both parties to say yes. In a successful negotiation, the new situation is better for both parties than the previous status quo. Despite these positive goals, all negotiations include elements of conflict. Even when both parties seem to be completely at odds, though, they should seek shared interests. If the parties express only their differences, the true dynamics of the situation may never become clear. Try to see the world as your counterparts do, learn to understand their beliefs, values, and mindsets. To figure out their motivations, listen to their stories. Allow them to tell them in their own way. Control your reactions and don't start debates. Take notes and read them back to make sure you heard correctly. People can change their minds, but this often involves social influences over time, as well as making and accepting truly rational arguments. Be careful, people may be emotional, intuitive, arbitrary, and ruled by old habits, even while they claim that they are being rational. Negotiating with the Iranians. Iranian students took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979 and took 53 Americans hostage. President Jimmy Carter and Secretary of State Cyrus Vance invited author Herb Cohen to the White House to advise them, because he was a hostage expert, understood Iranian culture and had interacted with the Ayatollahs. Cohen explained that the Iranians came from a culture that valued bargaining. Making concessions, he said, would only encourage the Iranians to raise their price. Carter disagreed. He believed that his culture and that of the Ayatollah Khomeini were not that different. Both, he said, came out of the same Abrahamic tradition. He wanted the Ayatollah to understand that in taking the hostages, the Iranians had violated international law. He and the State Department never understood the role of bargaining to the Iranians. That may explain why the Iranians held the hostages captive for 444 days. To free the hostages, Carter should have tried to change the way the Iranians viewed the situation, by changing their cost-benefit analysis. In other words, he should have made keeping the hostages more expensive than letting them go. Take it slow. Negotiators need patience. Being slow is actually a virtue in negotiations. If you don't understand something, admit it. Don't be afraid to ask others to repeat themselves. Don't hesitate to answer a question with a question. Asking people to explain what they mean slows down the discussion, which may open the door to more choices and new ideas. Negotiating by yourself is a mistake. Work with a partner, or if you must work solo, tell your counterpart that you want to defer making a final decision until you meet with your board, lawyer, or spouse. Don't involve the CEO or company president in the details of any negotiating session. Always start by being respectful and cooperative, even if your counterpart seems difficult. If you are nice to others, they will almost always be nice to you. When things get tough, you can always become more aggressive, but you can't reverse this order and maintain your credibility. Americans' national personality shapes negotiations. Americans have a distinctive national character. The French commentator Alexis de Tocqueville first described it in 1831, when he noted that Americans are enthusiastic, optimistic, like to see issues framed in black and white, and admire people who are authentic and even fallible. President Ronald Reagan captivated the American people with his self-deprecating style and willingness to admit he did not have all the answers. When his administration became involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, they felt they understood his actions and absolved him from blame. Overcoming disadvantages. Negotiators are only human. Like anyone else, they may make the mistake of stereotyping and categorizing their counterparts based on wrong information or prejudice. Similarly, they may misperceive what the other party is willing to concede. This can lead to stalemate. Always question your assumptions. If others like you, it can trump just about any disadvantage. People are willing to make concessions to people they like. If you offer to help the other parties or give them gifts, they often reciprocate. Take the time to establish rapport and build trust. The 10 principles of successful negotiating. Follow these 10 principles to reach your negotiation goals. 1. Setting objectives. Before you sit down at the negotiating table, set quantifiable, specific goals. Prioritize. Decide on your main objectives, which are often financial, as well as on subsidiary goals, which you may be willing to compromise or trade if that will get you closer to your main target. 2. Making concessions. If the negotiation stalls, try making a concession that doesn't involve the content of your goals but rather the negotiation process. For example, offer to meet on the other party's territory. Conventional wisdom says that the one who speaks first loses, but this approach is all wrong. Contact the other party and apologize for your role in the stalemate to show your flexibility and goodwill. 3. Open with commonality. Negotiations include both conflict and agreement. Begin by finding common ground. Chat. Talk about the weather. Make a human connection. Don't cut to the chase. Take up the least controversial issues first. Don't be intimidated by a no answer. This may only be momentary. Your counterparts may later change their minds. Ask what they don't like about your proposals. Discover their concerns and the reasoning behind their objections. 4. The Titanic principle. You can see only the tip of the iceberg. The Titanic ran aground on the part that was hidden from view. Many factors that affect the bargaining environment emerge only after some discussion. The initial offer is shadow, not substance. So, if the other party opens with a dollar amount, don't make an immediate counteroffer. That puts you in an adversarial position. Instead ask, how did you come up with that? Please explain the thinking behind that asking price. The answer will tell you a lot about the other party's motives, preferences, intentions, and interests. 5. The ping-pong table theory of life. Cohen and his family bought a house in the suburbs with a finished basement because they believed playing ping-pong as a family would bring them together. Briefly, the game seemed to be working. They played constantly with each other, with their friends, with the neighbors' kids. But when the balls got lost and the net broke, the games ended. They kept the table, but they used it for sorting laundry. The lesson of the ping-pong table is that people want things not for their intrinsic value, but rather because they think acquiring those things will fulfill their emotional needs. Residents of Chicago buy convertibles in the thousands. Even though the weather there is so awful, they can only put the tops down about 3 days per year. Even more than the ride in the convertible, they want the carefree life that the convertible symbolizes. Similarly, the party's goals in a negotiation may not make a whole lot of sense. 6. Broadening the gauge. Information can widen the negotiating road, making it easier for the parties to share it. The more information you have, especially about what is most and least important to your counterpart, the more bargaining power you have. People value things differently, so what's crucial to one side may be trivial to the other. 7. The Vail condo. Cohen lost a negotiation on a condo in Vail, Colorado, because the seller refused to bargain and lower the asking price. However, when he looked into the matter, he discovered that the seller was moving to Switzerland, and would not want to risk having the sale fall through because the buyer was unable to get financing. Cohen came back with a cash offer below asking price, and the seller accepted it. Never forget that information about your counterpart's situation can enable you to shape an acceptable offer, even when the other person seems intransigent. 8. Make M work. The investment principle says that the more you invest in a goal, the more attached you become to it. This may explain why President Lyndon Johnson escalated the number of troops the US was sending to Vietnam. The country had already sacrificed too much to pull out. Conversely, if concessions come easily, the other party has less trouble walking away. Especially in negotiations in which the parties mistrust one another, make your counterparts work for each concession. 9. You owe me an apology. If you lose your temper or misbehave during a negotiation, apologize. This is not a sign of weakness, and it can even work on your behalf, since it shows others that you are human and fallible. Damage control has 3 rules: release the bad news yourself, before anyone else starts looking for even more errors, confess completely and accurately, and don't try to lay the blame on anyone else. 10. Closing the deal. Every negotiation has an ending. Your counterpart will agree to close the deal when the negotiation has fulfilled 4 criteria. The parties have invested time and energy and don't want to start over. They have enough information to make comparisons and they feel they're getting a fair deal. The concession rate slows, as both parties have already given as much as they are willing to give, and both parties feel they had a hand in making the deal. Bargaining becomes more energetic as a deadline approaches. Most concessions happen close to the deadline, because otherwise no one feels any pressure. The Soviet Union used this dynamic to its advantage during negotiations over non-proliferation treaties, such as the 1963 Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which lasted 4 years, and the SALT agreements, which lasted more than a decade. Political scientist Lloyd Jensen studied the Soviet Union's negotiating behavior, and discovered that it made 80% of its concessions in the final quarter of the negotiation. To push others into action, convince your counterparts that delaying will harm their interests, that you won't back down no matter how long they keep pushing, that you may, in fact, start asking for even more, and that your offer is better than nothing. Power and perception. Use reward power and coercive power to manage the options available to the other parties. Be explicit. Show them the rewards and setbacks they can expect if they pursue a certain course of action. Talk to others who previously negotiated with your counterparts, find out how they reacted to conflict, who makes the final decision and if they have other alternatives. Take action to demonstrate your commitment. In this environment, negotiations can become tense, which can cause the parties to issue threats. Instead, act naturally and maintain your nonchalance. Insecure, weak people issue more threats than confident people. Maintain a flexible attitude as a barrier against aggressiveness and to protect your self-esteem. When you become aggressive, others react defensively.